Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Julie Haddix, and I am the Senior Director of Solutions and Customer Marketing here at Cvent. And I'm so excited to be joined by my fellow data nerds, Sunny and Kelly, to talk with you today about the trends that we're seeing based on our Cvent data. Before we get started, just some quick housekeeping notes. Seems like a lot of you have already found the engagement panel within the Cvent Attendee Hub. That's those icons you see most likely on the right-hand side of your screen, maybe on the bottom side if you have a smaller browser. But there's chat, Q&A, polls, survey, and upcoming webinars. Make sure to tune in to all 5 of those today. I see a lot of you are telling us where you're joining from. I see an international audience today. So welcome from everywhere in the world. I see Spain, Scotland, Texas, everywhere. So great for you all are joining. We'll also be saving time at the end of the conversation for some Q&A. We'll be taking questions via that Q&A box. So write your question in there. We'll be able to see it, approve it. You can also go in and upvote questions that others have submitted. We'll start with the questions that receive the most upvotes and take as many as we can live during the conversation. We're not going to be using any polls today since we're going to be focusing a lot more on sharing with you our trend data, but that is a feature available that we use in a number of our webinars. But before you leave today, please do not forget to take that post-event survey. We love feedback, tailor our presentations every time, really listen to it. So please do share your feedback via that survey. And if you like our content, be sure to check out those upcoming webinars and join us in the future. So with that, I want to quickly bring on the screen some of my fellow co-hosts who are joining me today. As I said, I'm Julie Haddix, Senior Director of Solutions and Customer Marketing. I have been with Cvent for 16 years now, and I genuinely love talking about technology within the meetings and events industry. I find it so fun, and I love these insights that we get to share with you today. Hope you'll enjoy them as well. So welcome to the stage my first fellow data nerd, Kelly Kopek, to introduce herself.
Thanks so much, Julie, and thank you everyone for tuning in today. As Julie mentioned, I'm Kelly Kopek, and I am a product marketer on the industry solutions team that Julie runs. And I really specialize in solutions that connect planners to hotels and venues. And one of those solutions specifically is our venue sourcing solution, which we'll talk a little bit about today, because that's where we can get really great data from everything that planners are doing when it comes to venue sourcing and how hoteliers are responding. So I'm really excited to talk to you in a little bit about that data. And I think Sunny's going to join us now and he can introduce himself.
Yep. So welcome now my second co-presenter and fellow data nerd, Sunny Pyle.
Thank you so much, Julie. Hello, everyone. Good to see all of you joining us in such large numbers. My name is Sunny Pyle. I'm Associate Vice President of Analytics at Cvent. I've been here more than 10 years. I genuinely enjoy doing all the analysis all day long. I spend most of my days digging into mountains of information, looking for patterns and interpreting them to help my audiences make smarter decisions. So that's what I would look to do throughout the course of this entire webinar. And I hope you walk away with something that you didn't know previously.
Wonderful. So thank you, Sunny and Kelly, and we'll look forward to hearing from both of you in a few minutes. As we dive into the presentation, I just want to start with a quick level setting. I know we do have a number of Cvent customers today, and some of you may be familiar with Cvent, but for those who aren't, just want to make sure you understand how we are able to share the data with you today that we have. And that is because Cvent as an organization really helps to drive the technologies that enable the meetings and events industry, both on what we call our event cloud side, or enabling planners and marketers to really manage their events business, as well as on the hospitality cloud side to enable hoteliers, CVBs manage their group business. And our technologies, as Kelly mentioned, help streamline that process, automate those connections, bring everybody together through what we call our powerful network effect. On the planner and marketing side of things, since we'll be diving into a lot of data today, this is the entire wheel process of who Cvent is, what technologies our event cloud provides, everything from meeting requests and approval through venue and vendor sourcing, room block and travel management, venue diagram, speaker exhibitor management, marketing, event website registration, check-in and badging, appointments, lead capture, events, insights, and integrations. It's not a Cvent presentation today. We're not going to be showcasing our technology, but just wanted to make sure that everybody who may be joining Cvent for the first time gets a sense of the full life cycle that we have through our technology to capture and gather this data. And so we do this webinar on a quarterly basis. Insider Insights is our opportunity to really share with you what are the trends that we are seeing based on what our customers are doing in our system. So we'll highlight how things are evolving over time, how they've evolved, how through the pandemic to our return to normal, how some comparisons to 2019 look like. And so I hope some of you are here for the second time. This is our second installment of Insider Insights. We will be back in action at the end of Q3 for our September version. But in between now and then, we have Cvent Connect, which is Cvent's annual user conference at the end of July, where we'll have a special version of Insider Insights on our stream stage, which you can view virtually, or hopefully we'll see some of you actually in person with us in Las Vegas, or of course, please do join us virtually for more sessions just like this. And without further ado, let's jump into the state of the meetings and events industry right now. As we set out in 2023, we identified 9 trends that we thought were really going to be impacting the events industry. And as we sit here almost exactly halfway through the year, these have definitely been the trends we continue to hear all the time. And we'll cover all of these throughout our data later. But just to kind of set your mind frame, we're talking about race for space, more connected event programs as technology adoption grows within the meetings and events world, in-person events really embracing digital elements. So much of our virtual world that we lived through during the pandemic has now bled over into our day-to-day now, and that includes in the events that we attend. But there's also faced this intense focus on cost savings. We might not be talking quite as much about inflation as we were, November, December 22, January 23, but inflation is very real. It's impacting a lot of the rates and spaces that we have available. It's impacting the costs, being able to do what we need to do for our event budgets. And that's really leading to that fifth trend, which is the more strategic use of event data so that you can really justify the spend at your events, show the impact you're making on your organization. 6 is internal events stepping into the spotlight. Definitely seen a boom of those within our customer data as organizations really focus on cultivating their culture within a hybrid work environment. Technology consolidation continues to be a trend within the events and marketing world. Events really being designed with ESG in mind. For those who aren't familiar with the term ESG, that's environmental social good. So everything from sustainability practices, a focus on DE&I within your event programs, accessibility within your event programs, just really bringing that awareness to the design of your events. And of course, rebuilding those partner and supplier relationships. So as I said, those were the trends that we set out with at the beginning of the year, and we are seeing them come to fruition every 2 months. Cvent and North Star Media produces a pulse survey where we ask you, the event planners of the world, what's going on. And what we're seeing in our most recent survey, this came out in April, our newer survey is live in the field right now. Those results will be shared at Cvent Connect, as I mentioned, that user conference. But 39% of you said in April you were booking brand new events now. 53% are saying those events that you're booking are less than 12 months out, so still having some shorter lead times on events. But 2/3 of you say that planners will produce more meetings this year as compared to 22. All of these first three trends you're going to see us showcase and highlight are also showing not just in what you're telling us, but within our data as well. We did see a slight dip in the value of face-to-face as opposed from the January survey to the April survey. Trend that I'm watching, but you'll see in our data that we're also seeing virtual events continue to be a part of the majority of event programs, which also could be because costs are still high and managing costs are a priority. So those are the big trends that kind of lay the foundation that we have in the back of our mind as we're looking at our data. So what does the data say? We're going to take a look first at the early stages of that planning life cycle and venue sourcing. So with that, I will turn it over to Kelly.
Thanks so much, Julie. As you mentioned, we'll start today with the venue sourcing data. And, while we're not going to be talking about our products, it's hard to not talk about just the power of our technology, specifically our venue sourcing platform, the Cvent Supplier Network, because we have 112,000 active planners who come to this network and find event venues through our database, which is over 300,000 global venues. So it's very, very powerful, and a lot of usage goes through our venue sourcing network. So we can look at the RFPs that you all are sending and the proposals that venues are sending back and get a lot of insight into what you all are doing with your in-person event programs and how hotels are responding. So I'm going to kick it off today with venue sourcing because it's a great place to start as one of those first phases of the event planning journey. And our first data slide, we're specifically looking at room night growth month over month, and this is in comparison to 2019 volumes. You can see starting in March of 2020, the effects of the pandemic were really starting to take place on in-person events. And they remained really until the start of 2022, around that February marker. And then the recovery started around August of 2022, where we see steady growth year over year. Where we see steady growth over 2019, and that continues then into 2023. And there is one note on here because there's a little outlier in the data with April of this year. There were fewer weekdays in April of 2023 compared to 2019. So there was a little bit of dip there. But the good news is we're seeing that bounce back with the growth in May of this year. Next, we're looking at booking window trends. And this is as through the RFPs that are sent and those event dates that are requested, we're able to see what booking window trends look like. And we're really not seeing a huge change in 2023 booking windows when we compare them to 2019. The majority of events are being booked in the year for the year. So that's that less than 12-month booking window. And Julie kind of just went over that trend through our pulse survey as well. And really looking at this data side by side, 2019 to 2023, it's great news. So we're seeing events pace kind of normalizing or even increasing from 2019. So we like to say that 2019 is kind of the normalized year for in-person events. It's really great to see booking windows are remaining consistent and steady. And it really tells us that in-person events are back to normal. Next, we're comparing growth stats this year to last, and this is across usage of the entire network. We're seeing 13% RFP growth overall year to date, along with 19% room night growth overall. And this tells us that not only are there more in-person events being requested, but the events themselves are getting larger and they're requiring more room nights, and this is year over year. The proposed rate growth is at 6%, which I know isn't great news for us, but it's really great to keep track of what the inflation is and what costs can be anticipated to be when sourcing 12 months out from a budgeting standpoint. So we like to keep track of this proposed rate increase so we can understand what venue spend will be in the future. You can also see some of the growth drivers in the orange on the right side that contribute to the overall growth that we just went over on the left side in the blue. Specifically, I want to call out the weekend events data. We're seeing that weekend events are trending because I know that is something that we're going to get into a bit later. So wanted to call that out now as a trend that we are seeing through our network. We're also able to analyze who actually is sourcing. And we are really interested to see that a lot of the sourcers on our network are actually first-time sourcers. 44% of the organizations that use Cvent to source their events are sourcing for the first time. And this could be due to a lot of reasons. We know that planners have moved to new companies over the last few years, or companies are just kind of ramping up and starting their in-person event program. But this is something that we like to keep track of. And we also know that organizations are relying more on technology, right, to help them with their venue sourcing process. So this is certainly something that we will keep track of when we see the profile of planners that are coming to our network. And we specifically also looked into these first-time sourcers. Where are they sourcing to right now? And we're seeing that the trend is mostly the Southeast US, no matter where the planner is actually located themselves. But it's interesting that mostly the Southeast US based planners, they're located in that area, are sourcing within their region. We also saw the Western US is receiving a strong amount of volume as well. And there's that similar trend where planners located in the Western US are doing their events in that same region and sourcing to the Western US. And when we look at planners across all of the network, we see very similar trends as well. They don't look very different. We're seeing the majority of RFP volume going to the Southeast US as well as the Western US overall. We also took a look at the brand scales that are trending in terms of what our planners are looking for in the brand. We're seeing the most growth for upscale hotel brands. That's in relation to both room night growth in the blue and proposed rate growth in the green. And this is very interesting because cost, as we know, is a major consideration when choosing an event venue. But it seems like planners are able to take on increased costs, and they're really prioritizing these upscale venues when sourcing, at least as an option, right, to look into. We also wanted to call out the independent venues, which are on the far right side. We're seeing a lot of room night growth in the independent venues as well, but lower proposed rate growth. And that means planners are really considering these independent venues as a great option for sourcing. And then year to date, we're seeing that international events are really starting to make a rebound. There are over 1,600 planners located in the US that are sourcing to locations outside of the US. And that adds up to over 4 million room nights that are sourced across more than 120 countries. Because our network is truly global, we have that many countries and more listed on the network and can validate and explore what that volume looks like. Last time we did this presentation, and this is a great example of our feedback being put into real-time usage and to showcase to you all. But we got some questions about what countries we're seeing increased sourcing volume and how that trend looked like. So we really wanted to show you what sourcing volume looks like in different countries. And we're seeing a 22% room night growth year over year in the Americas. And you can see that Asia has actually experienced the largest percentage of room night growth year over year of the countries that we analyzed. And they doubled what they saw in 2022. Australia and Oceania are also seeing significant growth when we look at room night volume. We also explored the same regions with proposed rate growth and what that looked like. And we can see the growth has been really significant worldwide, which I think we expected. Europe is the largest growth when it comes to proposed rates year over year. They had a 7.5% increase 2023 to 2022. And if we think about the slide we reviewed before this, when we looked at the room night growth in these regions, it kind of makes sense now that Asia and Australia are seeing the largest room night growth because their rates have not increased as much as the rest of the world. We've also analyzed some of these new brands that are popping onto our radar, and they're really new lifestyle or experiential brands that have come into the market over the last few years. And we wanted to share a snapshot of these brands based on how they're growing in terms of RFP growth. And demand for these brands are certainly increasing at a fast pace. And we're seeing that both planners and suppliers are kind of reacting to a change in attendee expectations. And this shows us that both are wanting something a little bit more than what traditionally has been offered. And attendees are looking for more than the typical hotel offering. And planners are willing, as we saw from a few slides back, to budget accordingly for those upscale venues to really deliver on the attendee experience. So I wanted to look at these top two brands that kind of popped onto our radar as large RFP volume growth hotels. And the first one is Voco. And this is an IHG hotel and resort brand, and it's upscale, and it's really grown across the UK and Australia specifically. The brand is focused on meeting attendee expectations in terms of delivering an authentic experience full of character and special touches. And the second one, Signia, is upscale as well, and it's in urban and resort destinations across the US. And they offer premium wellness offerings all under the Hilton brand. So this just shows you two examples of, some of those bigger brands who are offering these lifestyle brands that give attendees something a little bit extra in terms of the experience that really attendees are craving. And then earlier, I want to call out the first 2023 trend that Julie outlined, and that's that race for space. And it's really present for any planner who's looking for an event venue. And it's clear that, unfortunately, this is still plaguing planners. And it's really important to look at options, whether it's various destinations, brands, or venues when venue sourcing in order to get the options you need for your event. And our data is showing that the majority of RFPs are being sent to a single metro area, which means most planners actually have narrowed down the destination before they're getting those bids back and comparing and making their decision. But we're also seeing that a quarter of RFPs are going to 2 or more metro areas. And then 15% of those are going to 3 or more metro areas. And this data isn't compared to 2019 here, but my guess is that the 25% is higher than 2019 because planners do need more options to find that availability and get the rates they need in the market. And then I wanted to double click on that race for space trend that we're talking about and look into what the venue selection process actually looks like through our network. 35% of RFPs so far in 2023 had to be resent. So the planner sent them the first time, didn't get the bids that they needed, and they needed to send them to more venues to ensure they got the qualified bids that they needed. We're also seeing that a staggering 11 venues and 8 brands on average are copied on that first RFP send before adding more venues. So it's clear that planners are looking for more venues, more brands, and in more destinations than ever because they need to get, a couple of options. Let's hope for 1 or 2 from all of these venues that are copied to ensure that they find a venue that aligns with goals and can accommodate the event. And then finally, we wanted to take a look and present the typical timing of when you all send RFPs in relation to the entire event life cycle. So I'm actually going to bring Julie back on to take us through what that life cycle of an event looks like. And we're also going to deep dive into more of those event trends.
Thank you so much, Kelly. So one of the things that I have been really interested in as we started this data is, what is that cycle time of an event? And especially love looking at it through this lens of, a larger event versus a smaller event. Because when you look kind of at the data holistically, we're definitely seeing shorter lead times and, those events being planned really quickly. But what I thought was really interesting is when you break it out and you look at that blue, which is the event, the meeting request form is submitted. So somebody in the organization comes and says, we want to do that event. You can see that that is happening somewhere between, 15 to 30-ish days ahead of then an RFP being sent. So that approval process takes 2 weeks to a month to go through an approval process. And we say, okay, this event is approved. Let's have this event. Let's go ahead and source that meeting. And you see for the smaller events, that sourcing process is usually really quick. You got to get it done, in 54 days on average before the event launch or, across the whole event life. And that elongates a little bit longer to choose and make the venue selection before actually launching your event. What I found really interesting then is when you look at that time of the actual launch of event. So how far out are people actually starting to collect registrations for even those large events? Majority of us are launching registration somewhere between a month and a half, so 41 days, and 2 months out from the event, even in that 500 plus. So while the planning life cycle for a large event is significantly longer from when the event, is first requested and the RFP is submitted and sourcing begins to when we're actually launching our events, it is fairly standard range in that event launch date. So I thought that was really interesting. And so as we kind of shift from looking at that pre-event planning process, how far out are we starting to plan our events? What's the RFP sourcing process look like? What are we seeing as we actually get into the events that we're hosting? So now I'm going to take a few minutes to dive into our event program mix. And this is a trend. It's a very data heavy slide. So please do not try to read all the numbers on here. The gist of what these graphs are showing is that as compared to 2019, what is on the top, the number of events our customers are running on the Cvent system on average, and on the bottom, the number of registrations. And again, this is all compared back to 2019. So what you see super interesting on the top is that the number of events that everybody is hosting, all of our customers are hosting, is less events. And you see that percentage as compared to 2019. But you see on the bottom that while we were hosting fewer events, the registration numbers are more than 2019. And I found this fascinating because as we thought about the return to in-person 2 years ago, I was convinced we were going to see lots of smaller events. Everybody was going to go back to regional events. Large conferences were probably going to go away. But in actuality, we're maybe seeing the reverse. We're seeing fewer events, but larger events. And you see kind of at the tail end of those bars that the number of events in 2 of the last 3 months has started to increase above 2019 levels. So this is a trend that I'm going to see if, was that fewer larger events a blip, and are we going to kind of start to see that top bar turn green and those bottom bars kind of continue to flatten out? But really interesting trend that we're seeing in fewer events, more registrations, again, on average compared to 2019 across our customer data. But I also really love to look at this. My title is Solutions in Customer Marketing, Industry Marketing, which means I have a team under me that focuses in on specific trends for just specific industry vertical segments. So I love to look at our data to see what's going on specifically in some of those different verticals and where are the trends a little bit different. And so again, when we compare what's going on in the number of event programs registrations by industry segment as compared to 2019 for registrations and events, we see that more registrations compared to 2019 holds true in the majority of segments, but associations actually are still flat to tad bit negative on number of registrations total as compared to 2019. So if we have any associations out there, I see you. We know you're struggling to get your members back to your events. Definitely here to partner with you and help. Those of you in the nonprofit, financial services, business services, looks like what we're seeing is people are ready to come back to your events. That's awesome. But on the flip side, you're probably, some of you, experiencing that fewer larger events because business services, you're down slightly in the total number of events. So love this comparison, but when you accumulate it and there's two big bars on the side, trend holds that on average registration per event year to date versus 2019 is up. Average registration year to date versus 2020 is also up. So we just see consistently we are hosting larger events. So let's then now look at this by size of event program. How many events are we doing? And this quick comparison shows, again, most of us are doing more events, more larger events as compared to, this one is compared to 2022. So just looking year over year, which is exactly what our Pulse survey said. You guys are doing more events this year as compared to last year. They have more registrants compared to last year, and your budgets are lower. So we see you, it's tight, it's holding in the data. I can see pretty much green across the board, doing more events across all of our top 10 industry segments. Next thing that I wanted to look at was, okay, we're doing more events. What's the mix we're seeing in virtual, in-person as hybrid? Again, one of the up and down trends that I know we're all watching is, where does hybrid fit into the conversation? Is it still even a part of the conversation? And as you can see on this graph, and in case I know some of these charts are really, really small, the blue represents in-person, yellow virtual, green hybrid. Goes back to 2019. So you can see as the blue goes down, yellow goes up, the impact of the pandemic, the kind of starting gradual return of in-person with hybrid as the green comes into play. And as we've kind of come into the last 6 months, we're maybe starting to balance out with maybe a few fluctuations here and there month over month, but really starting to see all three formats in the mix. And so if we look at that next slide, what does that look like on event programs? When we break this data down based on each account, and that is 85% of our customers are doing in-person events on the Cvent platform. 40% of our customers are doing virtual or hybrid events on the Cvent platform. And then 10% are doing all three formats. So what this means is that at the end of the day, the majority of Cvent customers are doing some kind of mix of both in-person and virtual, whether that comes into play as an actual hybrid event. You could have all in-person, fully virtual, but in-person and virtual do still exist in the majority of event programs that we're seeing on the Cvent platform. And so how does that break out by the different industry segments? This is where you see differences all across the board. On the high end of in-person, you have financial services, where 91% of their programs contain in person. Our third-party agencies, 91% of you are doing in-person events. Health, life sciences, 91% are doing in-person events. Huge return to huge in-person and manufacturing at 97%. Almost all manufacturing programs have in-person events. Super interesting. On the other side, only 23% of manufacturing programs are leveraging some level of virtual. Most of our agency customers are very focused on in-person, a lot less virtual and hybrid. But then, after that, almost a third of every program or a third of the customers in each vertical is doing some level of virtual and hybrid. Nonprofits still seeing a little bit uptick in virtual usage at that 39%. And education, I know a number of our education customers do a lot of virtual training programs, and that's definitely showing up here in the data that we're seeing, that heavy use of virtual within the education sector, and also in the technology sector at 39%. So these are definitely verticals that do a lot of training, online webinars, virtual engagement of their donors in the nonprofit space to really get their message to reach that broader audience. The last slide I have before I turn this over to Sandy, as we look at our insights by events and event formats, is when are those events starting? As Kelly showed in the RFP data, we're definitely seeing RFPs that have a lot of shoulder dates and weekend dates within them. And you can see that playing out based on the event start date, because for those long events, those 3+ day events, almost across or fully across the board on format, so very heavy in starting those events on a Monday, which definitely is impacting that weekend hotel block that we're seeing in the RFP. For those shorter events, midweek is your sweet spot, whether you're in person, virtual, or hybrid. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is the sweet spot. So, maybe if you're trying to figure out a good day to not compete with other events and you're trying to do that single one-day event, you can look at a Monday option, or know if you're planning those quick events, you're possibly competing with a lot of others in those short, quick single-day events, all being midweek, which also probably makes sense if they're all midweek, because I know many offices have a hybrid culture that maybe you're only going into the office sometime in that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday range. So that makes sense to host your in-person employee events on those days, or even makes sense to try to capture the days that people are in the office to get them to come to an event, maybe at a downtown location. So those are some of the trends that really excited me. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Sunny to talk more about the trends that we're seeing.
Thank you, Julie. That was really interesting segment where you talked about a lot of benchmarks for different industry segments. I really loved that section that you did out there. Now I'm going to pick up from where you left, and I will focus on your last slide a little bit, where you talked about how in-person and hybrid event scheduling takes place. It essentially talks about that most of the in-person events are either ending right at the doorstep of a weekend, or they are starting immediately after the weekend is over. So especially for multi-day, 3 days or longer events, that's what we are noticing quite consistently across different event durations. Now, what that tells us is that there's this trend about weekend events that's growing and growing consistently. It has come up in our research that Julie covered at the beginning of the segment. It also reflected in the analysis that Kelly presented, and I'm also going to talk about it just as a reiteration. So if you notice, this trend about blended events is something that we have heard for more than 10 years now. We have all heard and we have all spoken about this ourselves, this combination of business and leisure travel. It is finally taking shape, and it is coming to life a lot more it has ever in the last decade. And so much so that it has also reflected consistently, if you have noticed, in the last 2 quarters, earnings call by large airlines and hotels executives. They've all talked about this weekend events being their important part of their strategy to deliver product innovation to their customers. What makes this trend more important and interesting for both planners and suppliers is that during the stay at the venue for an in-person or hybrid event, attendees are going to be in a business mindset as well as they're going to shift to a leisure mode at some point. In response, you must adjust and align your act of execution and delivery on the expectation of the attendees while they're on site and expecting a distinct experience, especially for their in-person event. I also wanted to call out one more thing. It's not just in-person events. Even for virtual events, especially multi-day virtual events, you see a little bit of proliferation of weekend events that are sneaking through virtual events as well. So I mean, as an event planner, you should look at not just this slide, but a bunch of other slides that are followed up, where I'm going to specifically talk about event design and event scheduling, which will help you drive improvement in your strategies, which will help you understand what else is going on amongst your peers in the industry. The next one on the sequence is single events. There's a little bit of transformation that is going through uh, single day events, and that is happening largely due to virtual events. Now, what we have noticed, consistently, we covered this in last webinar as well, is that more than 70% of virtual events are single day events. People are finally realizing the potential of virtual events where lead times are shorter, where you don't need a lot of attendees. A lot of internal events are also taking in the form of virtual events now. 70% is a big number. And then it also represents a sizable number of registrations. That is 66% of all virtual registrations are for single day events. Now, what that means is you're not just having a lot of events, but you're also having decent size events that are getting converted to single day virtual events. Now, when you look at the same thing for in-person and hybrid events, it's a 50-50 split in terms of events and 30-70 split in terms of registration. So a lot of large in-person and hybrid events are still multi-day, and they will continue to be because that's the requirement of the format, and that's how you are able to deliver significant amount of value to your attendees over a period of, let's say, 2 days, 3 days, or even more than that. Next aspect of event scheduling is getting your timing right for registrations. You saw Julie and Kelly, they both talked about the lead times, both in terms of booking window as well as life cycle of an event. Now, after you've launched an event, you have to meet your registration goals and attendance goals, and that's one of the most important KPIs for an event planner. We have certain things that we wanted to call out, and we clearly see a distinct pattern in terms of when the registration happens, especially when you look at it by event format. Now, for virtual events, you see a lot of registrations are still happening in the last 2 to 3 weeks. But in case of in-person and hybrid event, you are noticing that attendees are actually registering quite far out. And I think from their perspective, there are two things that they have to consider. Since they have to be on-site, most likely for a multi-day event, they have to be away from home and they have to really figure out what their scheduling is going to be. And that is clearly being reflected over here. For virtual events, you don't have to worry about a lot of logistics, which might be there in case of in-person and hybrid. So even as a meeting planner, I think you'll feel comfortable looking at this slide that you are noticing more and more registrations happening, at least 2 to 3 weeks out. And in fact, in case of in-person and hybrid, more than or roughly 50% of the registration is happening at least 4 weeks out. So hopefully that gives you ample time to plan for last-minute changes in your logistics plan, and hopefully that allows you to make sure that you're still prepared and there's not a lot of last-minute surprises for you for in-person and hybrid events. Now, from scheduling and design, let's just switch to something that we've heard loud and clear in our last webinar, where you requested how can we talk about more insight, share more insights around engagement for the sessions, especially for virtual events, and what that looks like. Now, before we get into the actual attendance numbers and engagement for attendees, I really wanted to make sure that I talk about something very specific to virtual events. Now, one might think that you should do small events and certain formats and certain event categories on virtual, but there is no category on our platform which has an in-person event and not a virtual event. So almost all event categories that we have are happening in virtual format as well. But there are certain formats that work better for a virtual event. especially if it's a small to medium sized meeting or webinars. That actually is the most popular event types of virtual events. Even conferences and trade shows, even though they have fewer events, but it is a sizable amount of events that are happening on virtual format. So especially think of large virtual conferences where you have international audiences. Trade shows and conferences are typically for that type of format, and we have that being represented in virtual events. Training sessions, one would imagine, and we know it already. It's already happening in virtual format quite a lot, and we also see that reflected here. So virtual format is for any event and every event is what I wanted you to take away from this slide. Now let's just dive quickly into some additional aspects of how do you drive maximum engagement for your virtual sessions and virtual events in general. First thing we looked at was virtual session length, and we were doing that to find a sweet spot for engagement. Now, what we have found, and I'm happy to report that 78%, and I could say that almost 80% of all virtual sessions are between 31 minutes to 120 minutes. What that means is that's where most of the virtual sessions are in terms of duration, and you still have fewer sessions that are either more than 2 hours or less than 15 minutes. But I think majority is between 30 minutes to 120 minutes. Next on the list is what exactly is the participation of attendees, for a virtual session overall. Now, what we found is that 64% of the sessions, attendees remain engaged for 80% or more of the entire duration. Now, if you look at that green section in the pie chart, 48% of the attendees actually attended 80%, at least 80% of the duration, and another 16% actually attended full session. Now, there's a little bit of nuance in full session because you could drop 2 minutes ago, just 30 seconds ago, that still doesn't count as fully attended. But I think anything above 80% is a sizable number, and that's what we wanted to bring forward. Now, same thing when we looked at by duration of the sessions. That's where I think the real insight is. Now, as an event planner, you have two challenges when you're scheduling and coordinating content for your virtual sessions. How long my session needs to be, and then what kind of attendance and engagement I could expect based on the duration. So as you could see, in fact, if I compare this with some of the industry publications that I've seen from other data providers, I'm happy to report that on Cvent, our overall attendance rate is close to 80% across different session durations. Now, you could see that numbers would change as you go from a lower session duration to a higher session duration. But I think except for sessions that are more than 2 hours, which I think is not a sizable number of sessions on the platform, you see consistent attendances across the board. Now, if you were to talk about the sweet spot, that's really between half an hour to 2 hours. So that's where you have a lot of green. That means 80% of the sessions are attended at least. In the case of 1 to 2 hour sessions, you also see maximum attendance where attendees completed 100% of the session. But if you are having certain virtual sessions that are more than 2 hours long, you have a task at hand. You really have to figure out how do you keep your audiences engaged for such a long period of time, and then give them enough options and engagement instruments so that they really attend most of the session or as much as possible in that session duration. And that's where I think we see 50-50 split in terms of more than 50% of the attendees are still attending 80% of the session, but I think you would want more than 50% of your attendees going above 80% threshold. Now, the last section or last slide in my presentation today is this important aspect, which I think is most understated trend, in my opinion, in the recent past. We don't talk about the power of on-demand. On our platform, especially for virtual sessions, what we have found is that more than 40% of the attendees actually watch on-demand content. Now, a lot of these attendees also watch content live, but I think the good thing is they also come back to these recorded sessions later on, maybe to clarify something that they did not pick or to further understand the details behind the content that was being presented. And in a lot of cases, we have noticed that this on-demand content is also being shared with other colleagues in the company or in the industry. And we know that for a fact because we have also noticed people who did not register for an event originally, they register to watch an on-demand session. So I think it is a great instrument that you have as meeting planners to extend the shelf life of an event much beyond after it is actually over. So it is a great sort of insight that I wanted to put forward, and for you to consider this very, very consistently and effectively going forward, so that for your virtual sessions you actually tend to not just expand the life cycle of that session, but also ensure that your attendees are engaged even after the event is over. Now, I covered a bunch of stuff related to scheduling and event design and session duration and session engagement in terms of attendance. I hope there were a few things that you didn't know previously, and I'm sure you knew a lot. So the validation is also a good thing. So that's the end of my segment. In closing, I want to thank you for patiently hearing me out, and I will turn it back to Julie for her closing remarks and some additional thoughts that you want to wrap it up with.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sunny. And that last slide you presented is one that I think is super interesting and is really stretching the boundaries of how we all think about event attendance. So much is that tuning in, showing up at a specific day and time to consume content in the moment and network. But on-demand content and extended engagement is really allowing us to extend the boundaries of our events and ensure our content is consumed after the event, repeat consumption, virtual attendees being able to watch an in-person session on demand later, in-person attendees being able to watch the sessions that they maybe had to choose between 2 and 3 at a conference can now go watch that content on demand later. Really, as event organizers, and special place in my heart as a content creator, to know that I can extend that lifetime value of my event content with on demand these days. So I know we only have a few minutes left for questions, and we had a lot of them. So I'm going to rapid fire a lot of these, bring Kelly and Sandy in. First, just a clarification question we had for those of you who joined us late. All of the data that we covered today is based on Cvent's customer data. So we have over 11,000 customers on the Event Cloud side. We have thousands of hospitality customers on the hotel side that we leverage our technology. So this is based on the actual usage data of our very large global client base of what we see actually being done on events, not just what you all are telling us. So next, going to go to a question that was submitted by Heather. Sunny, I'm going to start with you on this one. Have you looked into the data and of the companies that are doing hybrid events or leveraging all 3 formats? We pushed that to display as I was reading the question. Can anybody? I can't see the live display. We'll go to the next question and I'll get that one from Heather back here in a second. So we'll go to Ron's question. Is data showing that the registration fees for hybrid events are the same if you attend in person or virtually? Sunny, I know we've looked at some data on charging for events. We didn't share that today, but do you have any insights on charging for events and the fees for virtual attendance versus in-person attendance?
Yeah, so we did look at this during the course of analysis for this webinar. We decided not to use that slide, but I think I can give you the relative positioning of how the ticket size is. For paid events, it's the lowest ticket size for a virtual event, followed by in-person, and then hybrid are the most expensive. And I think part of that is not just because of the format alone. A lot of the hybrid events that we have, these are large audiences. These are typically industry conferences, and there's a lot of great content and speakers from truly diverse backgrounds and knowledge and industries. So I think that's the reason why why the ticket size or average ticket for a hybrid event is higher. So I think it starts at somewhere around 150, it goes up to 450. Based on size and different pricing strategies. But I think, yeah, that's all I could remember. But we could follow up if additional details are required.
Thank you, Sunny. Okay, and Heather's question. Of the companies doing hybrid events or leveraging all 3 formats, I would love to know what percentage of registrants are coming for virtual versus in person? And I know we have that data. Do you remember any of it, or do we need to follow up with Heather?
So just to clarify, if the question is what percentage of attendees are virtual versus in person for a hybrid event, uh, then I think it is quite different, and it changes by industry. It also changes by type of the event. If it's a conference, then you would notice that there are more attendees virtually than in person. But if it is, let's say, a hybrid event, which is more like a training or a product seminar, then you would also notice that there are fewer attendees on site and more attendees, virtually. So I think it just depends on the format and the type of event it is. But I think on the largest aggregation possible for the entire platform, you would imagine, remember the slide that Julie shared. I think the split is close to 50% of the registrations are about in person, and then the rest are split between hybrid and virtual. So there's no straight answer, I know, but it is a little bit nuanced in terms of how the numbers are.
Awesome. And, Heather, I can speak a little bit to our Hybrid Cvent Connect conference and some of we do hybrid events regularly. Another one that Kelly did was Cvent Travel Summit, and they look very different. Absolutely always plan for a lower attendance, or at least a lower registration number on the in-person, but also prioritize higher level engagement, higher level targets, really driving those key people you want to attend to be there in person. And knowing that while the virtual numbers may be larger, engagement, attention spans might be a little lower. So we really think through our strategy for the in-person portion of the event to be where we're driving that deep engagement, where we're really trying to cultivate networking, that in-person experience, and the virtual side of the event really being about learning, knowledge, content creation, and large reach of your message. So it's a very purposeful strategy, knowing that the in-person numbers will be smaller than the virtual numbers, but that's kind of on purpose and creating your event for that purpose. All right, I think we have time for one or two more questions. So this one, I'm going to go back to Sunny, and then we'll wrap up with a question to Kelly. Two more. Are weekend events trending business events? Actually, I can take that, Sunny. You can ask yes. The majority of Cvent customers are customers who are hosting B2B events. Yes, we do have some consumer events. When you look at association, nonprofit, those events are going to be donor member events, but we do consider those a little bit more B2B, as there's an engaged segment. Higher education, you have students and a more diverse audience base there. But we do consider most of the events to be B2B. But you are right. Question was submitted anonymously, that some of those weekend events could be swayed by some of those other segments outside corporate. Anything you would add to that, Sunny?
Yeah, so I think I'll add a couple of things. So we have noticed that most of these weekend events are typically, they're first in person, second they're multi-day, and I think third thing that you would notice is the basis, the audiences. You would find that most of these events have attendees traveling from either these are regional events or they are international events. So you have people flying in from, let's say, more than 3 countries, in some cases more than 5 to 6 countries. So I think those are the factors which are really sort of making these virtual events grow, and it's not so much of a phenomenon for smaller events. So I think those three things: multi-day, in-person or hybrid, and attendees flying in from multiple countries. So I think those are the factors which are driving this trend.
Awesome. And thank you, everybody. I know we're at the top of the hour. I'm going to go ahead and have Kelly answer our one final question. As an event producer, is it cost effective for using Cvent venue sourcing rather than just hiring someone to look for these venues?
Sure. Yeah. Happy to answer that one. I would say the value of using Cvent venue sourcing is owning your data. So our Cvent supplier network has a lot of features where you're going to get a lot of insight. Like we just went over all of the insights that we're able to pull from our network. We try to publish those insights to you through the network. For instance, we have aggregated rates that are displayed per city that you can actually see before you source, before you do your RFP, before you choose your venue. You can see what the rate trends look like. So you can get all that information upfront by having your own account. And I would say the main value of using Cvent venue sourcing versus hiring someone is you're centralizing all of your events in one place, right? So your entire organization, every single event, no matter the size, the type, if you source through Cvent, you're seeing all of that data in one network, and you can leverage that data when you're negotiating with venues. So you can see every hotel that's been used company-wide, and you can use that to negotiate, other events have taken place that are going to take place there. You could also, if you're involved at all with travel, even mark preferred hotels for your business travel as well. So you'll have all of your preferred hotels centralized in one place. And I know we're over, but I do want to plug one thing also that's coming to the network very shortly in July. We're actually bringing instant booking for simple meetings into the network. You'll be able to see rates for over 2,000 hotels instantly in the network, and you'll be able to forego the RFP process for those events and actually just book a meeting space and sleeping rooms in the network. So that's another great tool for you, because you can see those rates up front and save a lot of time, save a lot of money right there. So I hope that answered your question.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly. We did have a couple other questions come in specifically around Cvent product and usage. Again, not time and place to answer those questions. Please do follow up either in the Cvent community, the knowledge base if you're looking for how to use some of our different products, or your Cvent account team if you would like more information. With that, since we are over, I'm going to say thank you, Sunny and Kelly, for sharing your fabulous insights with everybody today. I hope you all fell in love with the Insider Insights Cvent Data Nerds the way we do. We love bringing this webinar to you. Please, before you go, do not forget to take that survey. We'd love to hear your feedback. We do take it into account for anyone who joined us in March. Hopefully you saw some of the changes that we made. And again, if you are interested in more of our content and like what you hear, we have a number of upcoming webinars. You can click on that upcoming webinars, or here they are on your screen. Couple of webinars on the 29th, around one on room block management, one on sponsorship. On July 13th, great webinar on building a webinar using ChatGPT. And July 18th, next steps in maximizing your sales and marketing integrations. And as I mentioned at the very top, July 24th through 27th, Cvent Connect, our annual user conference, coming to you live from Las Vegas. Hope to see you either there in person or virtually to hear more from us and the entire Cvent team. So thank you everybody again for joining us today. And we will see you hopefully later this month or next in September for our next iteration of Insider Insights. Have a wonderful day.